Thank you very much, Paula, and thank you for inviting me to be part of today's conversation. It's been fascinating hearing our panellists and presentation about painting a picture of what our future may look like. The resounding message that keeps sticking in my mind, the one word, is complex. Every one of our speakers has noted that the opportunities are vast, quite staggering, the impact, and yet the challenges that lie before us, both from an industry, regulatory and a community perspective, are also seemingly at times insurmountable, but I'm hoping that we'll all together achieve to make this change happen. Now, we do have some time in the program, some questions. I'm sure with the content we've heard today that it has agitated your minds, perhaps, thinking about how this impacts your particular industry or your particular business. So we have a couple of roving microphones in the room. Now, if in the interest of time, as well as a courtesy to all, could I please ask you from refrain of using this as a commentary-based or broad-based statements, rather frame it as a question. You can address it to any one of our speakers or to the panel as a whole. Just simply raise your hand. If you could please stand up, state your name and the company or organisation you're representing, and a microphone will find its way to you. We've got one at the front here, thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Tim Shanahan, Councillor at the RAC. Thanks, Peter, and to the panellists for your presentations today. I'd particularly like to ask you, Peter, in terms of the timeframes that have been alluded to, in terms of what consumers are expecting and what manufacturers are proposing to supply, where does the federal government, in your mind, see this coming in? Are they planning for something in the 2020, 2030 timeframe?
Wouldn't that be lovely? Look, my personal view is over the last 2 years the Commonwealth Government has started to pay attention, but they're not yet in the time frame that they need to be. So I think we're advocating for them to move faster. We've heard some comments that they're looking at 2030, 2040, 2070 even, some of them are talking about. It's nonsense, to be somewhat frank. My view is that there's capacity there. Certainly the National Transport Commission have been doing some very, very good work, and we applaud that. And I think if we can get behind that, it'll be excellent. But at the moment, they don't really have very good sight of this because it's a global phenomenon, and we're going to end up having the technology even if the government doesn't want it. It's coming.
Okay, thank you. We have a question over here.
Hi there, Pauline Tarrant from the City of Canning. Looking at the current rate of employment for truck drivers in Australia, there's about 170,000 of them, and those jobs are potentially going to be wiped out in the next 10 years, and we see that there's 16,000 jobs potentially coming with the autonomous vehicles. So I'd be interested in some comments from the panel in terms of the net loss of jobs across the nation, and perhaps some interesting and innovative ideas on how on earth we address that. Thank you.
Anyone?
Looking at me. Look, I think one of the things that all of us realise is that if you look at the jobs that are available and around about 20 years ago and what jobs are now, there's continually a change in, and particularly driven by technology, there's continually a change in our jobs and the types of jobs, and our children that are going through school and primary school right now, by the time they graduate, the jobs that will be available to them don't even exist today. When it comes to truck drivers and those, this isn't going to be a quick and fast process. As you've heard, it will absolutely take time. And there's other things that's an interesting comment to share today is that through technology and the use of that, I've actually heard that in some of the Asian countries, it's actually got to the point, particularly in Japan, just through online sales, that we've had truck driving companies actually had to call force majeure because they don't have enough truck drivers to deliver all the packages and things like that. So you're going to have where the need will change and the delivery will change and work through. It's going to be part of our future that will always be changing.
Peter, I think you've got something to add.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, and I think Steve mentioned before that we've got an ageing workforce in that sector, and We know that the average age of our truck drivers at the moment is about 56 or 57 years old. We can't get people into this sector at the moment. We're having to get immigration to address the challenge. And of course, our road freight task is growing significantly, and we'll need more people in the future for that. So I agree with the point just made about the fact we do have some time to move into that, a number of years, but not a lot. We have got an opportunity here to use automation to fill those gaps.
Okay, thank you. Another question from that side?
Jesse Jacob, City of Canning. Do you think it'll be a race to the summit for these technological companies? So, for example, will Tesla get there first and then everyone will be like, oh, it's been done? Or will there be how do you envisage the market playing out? And then do you envisage people wanting to buy these products or just use them as per minute or something like that? Thank you.
It's a complex question. Who would like to grapple that one?
Have a crack. So, like, there are many startups. So there'll be the early adopters, and then some of them will crash and burn. Some will be successful. Some actually be bought out by existing large companies that want the expertise, etc. So you see that with various iterations. So I think, we currently have a Navia bus produced by Navia. Will Navia still be in business in 3 years? I don't know. Will they be bought out or will they have grown? So I think we'll see some changes around that in terms of that technological aspect, and it'll evolve accordingly. So in terms of that aspect, like many startups, there'll be those that get in early, but there will be a race. There's certainly, the rewards are significant for the early adopters. And so, yes, there's a level of haste, and certainly around autonomous vehicles. In the old days, the companies used to see themselves as competitors, but now that's the IT companies. So our autonomous shuttle bus is really a sophisticated computer on wheels.
Carol and Peter, do you perhaps want to add a comment to that from a perspective of supply chain and the industry integration and where this shift actually will be seen fastest in the industries that you're working in?
I don't know whether you want to kick off first on that one?
Look, I guess this is the part of the unknown complexity that I talked about before in terms of what this future marketplace might look like. And I think the holy grail is that you end up finding that, especially in a world where most of our kids, especially those that go to university, that their biggest problem is how they pay their HECS debt off before they worry about sort of moving out of home and buying a house, that if you can take cost out of the equation for any of us, that's a good thing. Why buy a car if you can live in a city and actually use a ride-sharing service? So I think to the extent that there's going to be this intersection between technology, big corporate players that actually provide large fleets and a real financial benefit for us as individuals, then I think that's the perfect world that we're actually contemplating that becomes the new transport market in the future. The alternative that we all just continue doing the same thing we've always done and buy our own vehicle that spends 90% of the time either in a garage or in a parking lot, or worse, is actually starts to clog up a whole bunch of city streets because it drops us off and then goes and finds its own parking lot somewhere else. I'm not sure that's actually either a desirable future for any of us or a sustainable future, and I think it's certainly one that's going to run headlong into a lot of the aspirations, especially of local government, that they actually see their city centres and town centres there for people and not for cars. So I think there's some very interesting polarities that emerge in that one.
And can I just add to that? Look, I agree. I think there's going to be a lot of convergence. We're already seeing that in the marketplace. And Steve mentioned before about the convergence between electric vehicles, car sharing, ride sharing, autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles. We're seeing a lot of the companies out there, and there's so many of them operating in this space now. Those that you think about, like Samsung, that you think about having your TV, they're actually got an autonomous vehicle program at the moment. Companies like Apple, companies like Telstra are starting to operate in this space. So there's a lot of companies and they're working together and they've all got multiple programs underway at the moment. And one of the big opportunities I think these companies see is not so much in the hardware in the vehicle itself, but in the actual software and the downloads. A number of estimates out there that the value of the data insights in the vehicles are going to be 12 times the value of the actual purchasing the car itself. Now, I'm not sure if that's going to be true or not, but there's a major opportunity here, and I think there's an opportunity for Western Australia. we don't have to be in the manufacture of autonomous cars, but we could be in a whole bunch of niche industries right now in terms of data integration, data insights, software development, programming and so forth, and we should certainly explore those opportunities.
A question at the back of the room.
Yes, thank you. Brad Martin. I was just wondering if you have a vision or an expectation that ultimately it will be compulsory AVs. You know, do we get to a point where human drivers are actually banned? So what world's that going to be, and what problems do you foresee about it?
Steve?
The panel's looking at Steve for this one.
It's a good old capital G government question, love it, yeah. And look, I respond to this as a public servant, not as a politician, so and there's quite a big difference at times between those two things. Look, if we believe the world, I think Pat's got some clear evidence, 90% of accidents are caused by drivers and by driver error, whether it's because we're intoxicated or because we're distracted or whatever. And if that then leads to 90% of the road safety, road trauma problem being solved by AVs, then you've got to believe that the insurance companies are going to say, well, look, we might license you, we might give you insurance to drive your old car or your non-AV, but we're going to charge you a damn sight more because you're a higher risk to yourself and everybody else than an AV. So, look, this is it's a complex one. There's a rational side of things where you can see that becomes a part of the future world. It works easily in a dictatorship. A democracy like Australia, where we've got very much an egalitarian model for our society, and having government or somebody else tell us what we can do and what we can't do is actually more of a challenge. So, look, I can see that happening. It'll be sometime in the future, probably not when I'm still driving, but it'll be, I think it's just the logical side, if all of the stated benefits of AVs actually are materialising in the future.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Yes, please.
Well, the comment I'd make is 1905, when the RAC was established, if you drove a motor car, you had to have someone walking in front with a red flag. Currently, I don't think you're allowed to ride a horse down St George's Terrace. So I think the answer will be as you suggest. It'll just be a period of when.
Unless you're in the police force. One last question. Anyone got another question to throw at the panel? We've got one back here. Back of the room, thank you.
Okay, hello, it's Erica Barringer. I'm Director of Planning and Development at the City of Perth, and obviously we've been really keen to use the automatic vehicles within the City of Perth. I suppose, what can we do infrastructure-wise to facilitate it? Because obviously we had in the City of Perth some line markings that were affecting the automatic vehicle, so I suppose how do we plan ahead to enable those vehicles to traverse through the city?
I think, if I could take that one, I mentioned before that the technology is moving very fast. What was, in fact, the quality of the technology 12 months ago is no longer the quality of the technology today. Even, I'm sure Pat would say, the latest Navia bus is more sophisticated than the previous one. What we know is that we've had this sort of issue before. At the moment, the technology relies on line marking and signs and other features, curb lines, but we're putting a lot of work into that whole locational referencing space to get the GPS right, get terrain mapping right. There's been a lot of work done in that space. I personally think that it's going to become easier in terms of what the City of Perth could do. I'm sure that, and other councils of that nature, I don't actually think it's going to be that difficult, and I think now the task is actually identify where the technology is at, because it might be that you don't actually have to change too much in the near future.
Thank you.
Yeah, some of the things, so just to, obviously I had to truncate, but some of the things we consider with the trial, and obviously it's the first, leading the world effectively, but some of the things were very basic, you don't think about them. Height and density of the tree canopy, because that interferes with the LiDAR and the signals. Placement and form of buildings, the road environment, its geometry, medians, curbs, raised tables, etc. The road operation, speed and volume. Clearly we're not going to put a bus down the freeway. Number and complexity of interactions, pedestrians, cyclists, etc. So, the technology is very new. We sometimes say that we're a bit concerned the trial's almost been too successful. People think you buy one, you plug it in, put it on the road. It needs a fair bit of TLC.
Thank you. And on that note, we are up for time and Q&A. This is a big topic, and what I'd love to see is a continuation of this conversation throughout the Perth environment. I think there's a lot of different perspectives brought to this, and I know certainly from the startup space and in the innovation space, there are a lot of opportunities up and down the terrace with a lot of young, clever minds looking at this right now. So there's an opportunity not to shy away from the complexities of it. As a closing note, I'd like to now invite Megan McCracken, who's General Manager of Safety, People and Corporate Affairs from Brookfield Rails, to the lectern, who will propose a vote of thanks for our panel. Thank you.